Welcome to today's New England HIMSS webinar, Support Your Nurses with Automation and AI, presented by Vikas Gale, Chief Strategy Officer with ARTISIGHT, who is partnering with HPE. All lines have been muted upon entry today. Please send all your questions via the Q&A, and they'll be answered today by Robin Braun, CCO with ARTISIGHT, and Laura Curry, Senior Healthcare Practice Manager with HPE during the session. Vikas has over 15 years of healthcare leadership experience in two of the most prestigious academic medical centers in the United States, Barnes-Jewish Hospital, BJH, affiliated with the Washington University School of Medicine, and the University of Chicago Medicine, UCM. Following his time at UCM, he made the jump to the healthcare AI firm ARTISIGHT. As the Chief Strategy Officer, Vikas is responsible for providing strategic direction, managing business development, human resources, supporting deployment initiatives, and managing client success. Please join me in welcoming Vikas today.
Hi, thank you all. I'm really looking forward to this opportunity to spend the next 45 minutes to an hour with you guys, really talking about automation and artificial intelligence in the clinical setting and how those two things can really support your clinicians and nurses. So throughout this presentation, you'll hear me kind of reference nursing or clinicians. Please know that this really is for all of your frontline staff, whether it's physicians, techs, nurses. At the end of the day, the automation, artificial intelligence is really here to help kind of support the work that's going on and hopefully alleviate some of the burden that our staff is feeling right now. As it was mentioned, I'm Vikas Gale, I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at ARTISIGHT. And one of the things I like to highlight, just a little bit about myself prior to jumping into the presentation here, is that one of the big reasons that I chose to move out of the provider world and into more of the technology space was when I was thinking about my time in clinical operations. During my 15 years, I was fortunate enough to be able to run almost every clinical department and had great leaders and support to really kind of ensure that we are moving the organization in the right direction. And the two institutions I worked at did a phenomenal job about really talking about bringing joy back into the workforce, right? Helping mitigate nursing, clinician burnout, reducing compassion fatigue, and really getting people back to understanding why they practice medicine, why they got into this space. And one of the things that was really kind of impactful to me was when I take a step back and think about that, I think about my first day in clinical operations to my last day in clinical operations. And unfortunately, it kind of felt like we were always still working on that same aspect. It didn't seem like we were able to truly move the dial where it needed to be. And when I think about the initiatives that we moved forward with and how we implemented technology in that clinical space, unfortunately, the technology really wasn't something that helped mitigate or stem some of the effects that our teams were feeling. And more times than not, it felt like as we introduced technology, there's actually additional burden that was put onto our nurses or additional steps that our clinicians had to do. And that's really where I think automation starts to take hold and where automation, artificial intelligence is really poised to change healthcare for the better and really transform us into being a more reliable and stable environment for our clinicians. So a little roadmap of what we'll kind of go through today. I'll quickly highlight our HPE partnership and ARTISIGHT and kind of what we do, but then really to the meat of the presentation. First I want to lay the groundwork of what you guys probably know better than I do, right? The labor force and the crisis that we're all facing right now. And when we lay that foundation, move into understanding what automation is and why we believe it really is the future of transforming the clinical setting. And once we have that foundation, we can start talking a little bit more about artificial intelligence. And when you want to move in that direction, what does training look like? Not for the individuals and the end users, but more for the actual algorithms that are there to help support the clinicians. And then we get to the more fun, kind of jazzy stuff where we'll get to see some demonstration videos and things like that of real life use cases that are being deployed throughout the country in the clinical setting and how automation is helping kind of impact documentation, impact notifications, and really starting to take things off of the plate of our clinicians. The HPE partnership, again, as it was mentioned, we'll answer any questions if you want to put it in the chat. We're happy to have a discussion with you guys afterwards as well. So on some of these slides where it may be a little bit more complex, similar to this, I think the big thing that we're trying to get out of this is that HPE has done a great job developing an infrastructure that supports enterprise-wide support for enterprise workflows. And so the infrastructure that's in place here really highlights how this impacts all of the workflows that we would want to move forward with and try to positively impact on the clinical setting. And then quickly about ARTISIGHT, you guys should be receiving this deck after the presentation or by tomorrow, the latest. There's a couple of links in here. I encourage you to take a look at it. But basically, ARTISIGHT is an artificial intelligence company that leverages sensors in the clinical setting. When we deploy these sensors, and we'll talk about what sensors kind of refer to, but these sensors capture data, and these data points do certain things. So they either integrate and document things automatically into the EMR. It can send notifications to your clinicians so they know where their patients are or where items are that they're looking for. It can send notifications to patients and family members. And at the end of the day, we really are just an end-to-end enterprise artificial intelligence as a service for hospitals. I highly encourage you guys, if you have time, to click on the last link here where it goes over what our vision is. It's a quick 2-minute video or really around what does a future of a smart hospital look like when you kind of move forward with true automation. Okay, so with all of that out of the way, we'll kind of get to the meat of what we want to talk about here. And this really is kind of laying the context of what we're all facing. And again, you guys probably are dealing with this a lot more than we are. And I'm hoping that this rings true when we talk about what the real problem here is. In healthcare, when we think about a hospital labor force breakdown, really about 30% are the non-clinical staff. So all the back end, IT, the billing, revenue management, all of those kind of individuals, all critical functions to ensuring that the hospital works properly and ensuring that patients get through our system. The remaining 70% really is the clinical side. And so when we think about automation, there has been automation in healthcare, but I would say that most of that over the last 2 decades has really been around revenue cycle management, improving registration, improving the billing cycle, all of the things that would probably be more focused around this 30%. Again, all great, fantastic work that needs to happen, but there is another chunk of individuals that we have not spent time on focusing when it comes to automation. And so the rest of this deck and really kind of what our thesis around this is really focuses on the 70%. So the folks that are managing your patients. So when we think about the overall US economy and where we are from a labor force participation, this gray line, this top line, shows kind of our US population that we have. And it's been steadily increasing. We're right now around 330 million or so. This dark blue line has been trending down steadily. You see 2 kind of rather large dips. One is around 2008. And this kind of reflects the labor force participation and the baby boomers that were starting to leave the workforce environment. And then another larger dip here, which we all know is the pandemic. And what's concerning is we're not seeing the recovery like we used to when we would see a little bit of a dip. And when you multiply the labor force participation and the population, you get this yellow line, the gold line, which is our working population. And this is where it gets a little scary. This is where our population that's working truly has remained flat or is starting to decline. So not only do we have baby boomers that are leaving the workforce, they're also consuming additional healthcare resources. And if the pandemic has shown us anything, it's shown us in a very, very short amount of time, really what the next 20 years is going to look like, right? We have this influx of patients that are coming in. When we think about the baby boomers and how they're going to need healthcare, that's what our next 20 years looks like, where we are seeing a fairly large gap of the population and who's actually working. And so that leads into a very unique paradigm that occurs only in the healthcare industry. And it's where our labor productivity year over year has been relatively flat or declining. But during that same time period, our labor cost continues to grow. And so what this tells us is that year over year, we continue as a healthcare industry to put more and more people or try to put more and more people into the pool to have the same output, if not less, every year. This doesn't mean that anyone's doing anything wrong or that we don't know how to kind of manage our labor productivity and labor growth. What this really reflects is how complex healthcare is and the amount of challenges when it comes to regulations and compliance that's needed, and all absolutely necessary and why it's out there, but it continues to put a strain on the margins that healthcare leaders are working towards. And this is why we have to talk about automation, because if we don't do something to really impact productivity and labor costs, that cost curve is going to continue to be bent, and it's going to continue to put a strain on the margins that institutions are relying on. And outside of all of that, it continues to put a massive strain on our nursing and clinicians. It's why we're continuously seeing that nurses are burning out at higher rates than ever before. So not only do we have folks leaving the workforce because of COVID, or they don't want to get vaccinated, or whatever it may be, but we're also having nurses that are getting burnt out and just can't handle the emotional, the physical, all of the stress that comes along with managing our patients. And burnout and compassion fatigue, as I mentioned earlier, has been a topic of conversation for the last 20 plus years. We're seeing it exponentially grow right now during this crisis that we're facing. And Becker's put out a really good article a little bit ago, really highlighting that one of the other things that isn't widely discussed, but when we talk about the impact of labor shortage, the other side of it is the impact it has to care. And again, this doesn't mean that people aren't trying to do their best. They absolutely are. The problem is if you don't have enough labor, or the labor that you do have is just mentally and physically exhausted and burnt out, there's going to be impact to the care that is provided. And so now that we have the context of understanding really the problem and what we're all facing, and how this problem is not going to go away, this isn't a 2 or 3 year type of cycle, it's going to be ongoing. We have to really think about what options we have, because just adding more and more people is not getting to the resolution that's needed. Sage Partners, we kind of look at this survey for a little bit of guidance to help explain automation and really help explain what are the requirements that are needed to move forward with automation in the healthcare industry. Sage Partners, in conjunction with Olive, and again, Olive is one of those companies that does really fantastic work with back-end office, billing management, and all of that stuff, and automating that work. They put together a survey every year, and they reach out to healthcare leaders, the decision makers in that institution that are running fairly profitable institutions of $800 million of revenue or more, to get an understanding of what does automation look like to them, what are the requirements that we would need to see, and how has it worked if they've moved in that direction. And so you see a couple of promising things, right? Senior leaders are starting to be more familiar from 2019, 2020, what is robotic process automation? So just another form of automation. And there's a nice uptick in folks highlighting that they feel like they have some sort of artificial intelligence strategy in place. The area of opportunity, or the area of concern, however you want to look at it, is really this kind of area where things haven't moved past strategy to operations. There hasn't been much work to move it into implementing into the clinical setting or having some sort of proof of concept to test out. And there's a lot of reasons why. Right? Senior leaders being asked about automation highlight 7 key factors that are true requirements. These are no-goes. If you can't meet these, they don't want to move forward with automation. Security and compliance, not surprisingly, at the very top of the list. Right? Ransomware, cyber attacks up 300% in healthcare alone year over year. This is a big thing in ensuring that if you move forward with any type of automation, how do you ensure that it's safe and your data isn't going anywhere and stays behind your institution's firewall? A proven return on investment. Healthcare leaders don't want to move forward with automation or any project that's going to require really change management and an investment if you can't tie it to true dollars that are coming back to the institution. And we have another slide on this, I think it's the next slide, that really talks about the folks that have moved forward with the project, what those ROIs look like, and we'll talk about that here in a second. These senior leaders really want to work with organizations and vendors that have healthcare expertise and focus. It's real easy to say, hey, let's look at the banking industry, or let's look at manufacturing. What are they doing from an automation standpoint? But at the end of the day, healthcare is unique, and we have our own unique nuances that folks have to understand if they want to work into that world and want to make an impact and improve kind of what's happening. Not having that healthcare expertise is really a downside. Not unachievable, but it is a downside when you talk about wanting to move forward in something as transformative as automation. Reliability and uptime. Senior leaders know that our clinicians are working 24/7. We have patients 24/7 in our four walls. You need automation that is also going to be working during that time. If your automation is only from 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, it's really missing the boat. If this isn't mimicking your clinicians and mimicking the work that they do, it's really not going to provide the value that's needed. The ability to scale with a single vendor. And I think this one's a really key one, and we have a couple of slides on this. Healthcare leaders are starting to realize, and I'm sure for most of you that are on the call, it's not uncommon that in your institution, you have hundreds of vendors that are solving hundreds of different problems for you. And it's becoming more and more challenging to really manage those vendors. It's becoming more and more challenging to really mitigate the costs that are associated with all of that. The ability to scale with a single vendor is critical. And we'll highlight why that's important, but it helps future-proof the problems that you have. It allows you to work with a handful of vendors and scale appropriately on problems that you know of today, but also your future set problems that you don't know of just yet. The adoption by leading healthcare providers. A lot of institutions want to work with other companies that already have a proven track record and have worked with institutions in the healthcare space and understand the challenges that are there. And then finally, little to no strain on IT. I would argue that IT is probably one of the most critical departments in the healthcare institution. They are always overworked, always understaffed. Every annual operating plan that's out there has some sort of IT component. Every initiative has some sort of IT component. And so if you want to move forward with automation, the IT department absolutely has to be included, but you can't over-inundate them with it. You can't have them have this be their sole focus and occupy their time completely where they're not able to do all the other work that they need to do as well. So the return on automation and the proven ROI that's needed. For the senior leaders and the institutions that actually did move forward with some sort of automation, whether it was a proof of concept or some true project, the concerning thing is the lack of ROI that's there. And what this tells us really is that we're choosing the wrong problem first to solve. There has to be a focus on making sure that you're solving the right first problem, because automation really needs to have this crawl, walk, run type of strategy. You have to start off small, solve a problem that truly is going to provide value to your institution, provide value to your clinicians, and generate somewhat of an ROI that's going to allow you to continue to move down that automation path. And that's where scaling with a single vendor really comes into play. When you talk about scaling with a single vendor, it's really working with vendors that have a platform approach and not a single product solution type of approach. And the reason behind all of that is when you work with a vendor and you scale with them and they have a true platform that can help solve a multitude of problems, you really focus on the first one or two problems that have a fairly high ROI. But no institution is going to muster up the resources to focus on problem 14 and 15 that generate less than a 1x ROI. All problems that are important, all problems that our clinicians are dealing with, but this is not going to raise to the level of your COO or CNO or CFO to generate the resources to find the right point solution to fix that one problem. But when you work with a vendor and scale with a vendor that has a platform type of approach, and what these senior leaders are noticing is that you're able to start focusing on those smaller problems, but cumulatively they have a fairly high ROI and start to supersede even that first right problem that you're choosing. So now that we have this context of what Sage has kind of put together and understanding really what automation and what are the requirements for that, we get into having this shift into automation with AI. And Harvard Business Review put this article together a couple of years ago. And I think that what's really important to highlight here are really two key components. The first is you have to level set your understanding of what you're going forward with if you decide to move forward with automation and AI. You are not going to solve all your problems day one. You have to truly have this crawl, walk, run strategy and be very minimal on your scope as you initially try to move forward with this. Why I think healthcare is really poised to move in this direction is because of these three fundamental shifts that they highlight in this article. Over the last 10, 15 years, healthcare went through a massive transformation where process improvement was embraced. I bet most of the organizations on this call have some sort of process improvement foundation to their business work, whether it's Lean, whether it's Six Sigma, PDCA, whatever it may be. At the end of the day, healthcare organizations have started to accept looking at problems, leveraging data, and trying to move forward with solutions. And the fundamental shifts that are needed for organizations that want to move forward and be a truly high-powered AI type of organization need to have a lot of those key components that healthcare, I think, has already actively been working on and have solved. So moving from a siloed environment to more of an interdisciplinary collaboration. Moving away from experienced leader-driven decisions to having decisions based off of true data. The problem that we have in healthcare, though, is our data is not always great because we rely on humans to capture that. And that's where automation and sensors come into play. And rigid and risk-adverse to more agile and experimental. I think this fits perfectly with the process improvement and the testing of new solutions and evaluation, and then deciding whether you move forward with standard work in that process or not. So healthcare is poised for this change because of a lot of the work and the foundation that's been put in place over the last 2 decades or so. So now that we know that there's this crisis with the labor side, we have somewhat of a foundational understanding of automation, the requirements around it, and what's needed to move forward with it. We really get into what training looks like. And this isn't training for your end users. This is the training that the algorithms actually need to help make the machine learning and the automation in your space viable and useful for your clinicians. So machine learning AI is just that. It's teaching a machine something. So this article here in the New York Times talked about AI farms. And so what it's highlighting here is, as a real example, Google wanted to develop an algorithm to identify cats. So if they saw a picture online, could they have an algorithm that just tells you where a cat is in that picture? And so the way they had to do that is they took millions of pictures off the internet about cats, and they sent it overseas to China or India, where labor force is cheap. And they have these AI farms that are set up where individuals all day are looking at these images, they're drawing a box around the cat, and they're labeling that or annotating that as a cat. When they're done, they send that back to Google, and now Google has a fairly robust data set that they can train an algorithm on. And then the next time they see a picture, the algorithm can tell them with fairly high certainty whether there's a cat in that picture or not. That right there, though, is the single biggest reason why we don't have clinical automation in the clinical space. There's no healthcare institution that is going to feel comfortable with taking live images or picture stills from your clinical space, sending it overseas, sending it anywhere to get annotated or labeled to identify what a patient with pressure ulcer looks like or what fall risk may look like. And so as you think about moving forward with this, you really need to work with companies that focus on what's called self-supervised architecture. What this is, and again, we can have more of a technical call around this, but at the end of the day, what this really refers to is all of the images, all of the data that's captured by these sensors stay on your premise. They don't leave your footprint. They stay back there, and all of the analysis and all of the annotation is happening by another algorithm. And it's training pictures to understand, what does a fall risk look like? What does a pressure ulcer look like? What does a closing of a patient look like in the operating room? All of that happens behind your institution's firewall, patient protected, avoiding any type of HIPAA violation, and it allows you to scale in a significantly quicker way because you already have what's called these leader models. So models that are developed at other institutions that are put onto these servers to help train kind of the algorithms. And so when you start having that type of process in place and you start to deploy sensors, here's what it looks like kind of in the real environment, right? We want to mimic human senses. Our CEO at ARTISIGHT kind of highlights this. He's a practicing anesthesiologist, and he always talks about he needs 2 things to take care of patients: his senses and the EMR, which at his site is Epic. And so when we think about deploying sensors, we really are trying to mimic what the human senses would look like. So you need sensors that are going to capture items, right, from an eyesight standpoint. So that's cameras in your inpatient area, cameras in the procedural area, cameras in your operating rooms, and you're layering artificial intelligence on top of that. You need to be able to see and hear and speak And so you utilize voice recognition speakers. So things like similar to like a Google or Alexa type of speaker. And you need spatial context. So really understanding what's around you and where items are. And that's where you leverage infrastructure around ultra wideband or Bluetooth technology, RFID. And in combination with all of this and having a platform, you're really able to start to capture the appropriate data that's needed to start taking things off of your nurse's plate and taking things off of your physicians or your techs kind of area so that they have less work to do from a documentation standpoint and more time available to spend with their patients. So here's some examples of what we've kind of seen in the clinical space. This is what working with customers over the last couple of years, where we have seen true value in being able to see the different type of sensors and the different types of problems to solve that generate not only a high ROI, but also impact your staffing in a positive way and really get to the crux of the staffing shortage and the burnout rate that's there. So when we think about the operating room, right, we all know that the operating room is usually our most profitable area. It is highly complex. You're working between multiple departments, between your prep, your intra-op, and your PACU, and trying to have an efficient communication that happens between all three areas. In this environment, cameras can be deployed, and you can see them on the ceiling here. Those cameras capture data points, and those data points can do a wide range of things. You can either document your EHR, it could send notifications to your clinician to let them know where your patient is. It can update dashboards to give an idea of where patients are in real time. Here's what it looks like in real time. A patient is getting wheeled into your operating room. And there's a couple of key factors here. One, not only is patient identity preserved, but also clinician autonomy. There's no need to know who's doing what. So those are all blacked out just like the patient. You notice when the patient wheeled in, on the bottom it says patient in room is true. That's a specific data point. In the operating room, it's critical to know when patients actually enter into your room, and it's documented right now by nursing. But this is a data point that's critical because you are able to bill by the minute a patient is in the room. And so not only are you able to alleviate a data point like this from a nurse, so you don't see any nurses running to the computer to be able to document what time this patient actually arrived in, but we also know we're able to capture this significantly more accurately. So now from an operations standpoint, you also have better data that you're able to look off of. This is one example. We have hundreds of other ones where you're also able to do conversely, when drapes are coming down, know when drapes are coming down, send the appropriate notification to your PACU team so that they know in the next 10 minutes they're about to receive their patient. You also send passive communication to your housekeeping team so that they're available to be outside this room and clean this room and turn this room around quickly. So you really impact your wheels out to wheels in time. Not only are you mitigating the things that the nursing and the clinicians have to document, but you're also actively impacting kind of your overall operations, which has a significant impact to the bottom line. When we have cameras and look at laparoscopic feeds, again, when we think about training models, because this is all happening on premise, doesn't leave anywhere, doesn't go to the cloud, is all behind your institution firewall. When Surgeon Smith, Dr. Smith, when she has done her 10th Whipple, and we know what those times are, we have estimated duration times that are fairly accurate to know that when we've seen these images and when she has done this Whipple the 9 other times, at this stage, she only has 30 minutes left. This again is a huge time saver for your OR charge nurse, who generally is running amongst all of their OR rooms, trying to understand where cases are, calling the surgeon, calling the anesthesiologist, asking how much more time is left in the case. So not only do you eliminate the need for that work, and not only do you obtain better data around it, you can also get the other stuff started. So if you know there's 30 more minutes left in this case, you can work with your PACU or your prep team to make sure that the next patient is ready to go because you're running ahead of schedule. It is hard to find an OR area in this country that doesn't generally run into late starts and have overtime. And a significant part, not only is because patients' conditions change and add-ons are brought in, but there's also a significant component of there's just poor communication that happens because there's so much going on. And so you have to be able to provide this type of data that is concrete and is accurate and is passive, so it doesn't force anyone to do anything, to the charge nurse or to the anesthesiologist charge of the day, so they have the most accurate information to help make the improvements that are needed in that clinical space. You can leverage cameras also on the inpatient side, right? So looking at having a digital window into a patient's room. And these are all live streams. Nothing is recorded, nothing is saved. And it again is all behind the institution's firewall. But we know nursing is not staffed based on geography. They don't have all 4 or 5 of their patients in one corridor. They're all over the hospital, they're all over their unit because it's based on acuity. And so they're running back and forth. You provide them a video feed, they can have a two-way dialogue with the patient. They can understand what's going on. You can have, instead of 10 or 12 techs being pulled out of staffing to sit with patients, you can pull one who can watch now 12 patients and be able to provide the assistance to that patient remotely as needed. But when you get into algorithms and when you get into machine learning, where you start to help support your nurses even more is you start to add a digital eye to this. So you actually start to have algorithms that are looking at a patient and seeing what movement's happening to have an idea, is this patient potentially going to fall? Because if they're potentially going to fall, how can we send appropriate notifications, whether it's turning on an alarm or sending a canned message or notifying a nurse to run into that room? And all of that can happen passively. This is where we talk about solving for the first right problem. Falls are a $60 billion industry in healthcare. And by able to adding AI to support your clinicians, you can start to really reduce that. This is what the end user sees. They're looking at a patient who's sitting in a chair who then goes to a bed, and we have an understanding of where they are on a status from a fall risk standpoint. Are they low, medium, or high? At most institutions, you may have a bed alarm or a chair alarm. That requires a nurse to remember to turn it on or a tech to remember to turn it on. When you have a sensor that's in the room, like a camera that leverages artificial intelligence, there's no turning anything on or off. It's running in real time and gives you that understanding. So no matter where that patient is sitting, whether they decide to sit on this stool over here, the camera is picking that up and the algorithm is understanding, is this person in a safe position or not? And if they are in this medium risk status, setting it off an alarm and helping mitigate having a fall actually happen. It's why when we've worked with customers, we've been able to actually have a dramatic impact on falls. This is what we mean by solving for the first right problem. If you're able to reduce your falls and falls with injury, you're significantly impacting not only the patient care that happens, but also from a staffing standpoint, not having to add a sitter to every single room. And so this is where it gets exciting when we talk about how do we really continue to push the envelope when it comes to automation, specifically on the inpatient side. When we think about traditional nursing and where they are on the automation, say that's the start. You provide your nurses with a camera feed. We talked a little bit about that already, right? They're not staffed by geography, they're staffed on acuity. They now have the ability to actually see what's going on in that room. You've provided them a little bit more of an opportunity to be productive. Where we're moving towards and where the future of this is all moving towards is actually having a licensed professional on the other end of that camera. So as we talked about that workforce and folks not going back into the workforce for whatever reasons, nurses don't want to get vaccinated or nurses want to stay home and take care of their kids, but being flexible, you have light and duty nurses, you have nurses that are truly burnt out that just don't want to be at the bedside. All of them still have a phenomenal skill set. All of them are licensed individuals that can provide value to you and your institution. And so what we're seeing and where we're moving with specific industries or specific organizations is really having a remote nurse on the back end looking at those camera feeds. So that when a bedside nurse goes into a room, they use a wake word. So similar to like, hey Google or hey Alexa, you utilize a wake word that notifies the remote nurse. So on their screen, that remote nurse sees that that nurse in room 304 is talking to me. And that bedside nurse can say something like, I'm going to change the central line dressing for this patient. The bedside nurse will go ahead and do that procedure. The remote nurse sees this and can go ahead and then document it. And a couple of key things here. One, we've eliminated the need for the bedside nurse to have to now go back to her desk, open up the patient's chart, find the flow sheet, do the documentation, which more times than not is probably actually longer than the actual clinical procedure of changing the central line or the dressing change, I'm sorry. But what's also really cool and what's really exciting, and it gets into that self-supervised talk that we had, is that when that remote nurse is actually documenting this, because there's a live stream that's coming through, that remote nurse is basically drawing a box around that cat and is basically saying, this is what changing a central line dressing looks like. And so it's actually actively training your AI. This is what this Harvard Business Review article is talking about. It's this crawl, walk, run strategy. There's no one out there, if anyone out there comes to you and says, we can make you an AI organization day one, and you'll do all these grandiose things, they're lying to you. There has to be an aspect of training and getting your team on board with it. And that's why you start off with just having a camera feed. And then you provide some support around that camera feed to take work off of your nurses. And that continues to train the algorithms. So the next time that nurse walks into a room to change a central line dressing, the algorithm has been trained sufficiently enough to pick that up. So you don't even have to connect with the remote nurse. The camera sees what's happening and then can automatically document that in your EMR for you. And that's the future. That's where we need to move towards, where you are training all of these algorithms to truly pick out key things that are happening at the bedside. It's not going to eliminate all charting. It's not possible. But if it can start to take away 1 or 2 or 3 things per shift, per patient that a nurse has to do, it's going to have a positive impact. And we know it's a positive impact because documentation on average is taking over 1/3 of a nurse's time. I'm sure all of you have heard the gripe from nursing and physicians, the amount of time they are spent behind a computer. They did not go to nursing school or medical school to document. Their passion, their calling, all of that is to be at the bedside and support patients. And that's what we need. And so if you're able to remove the documentation part from the bedside nurses, you can actually make them more productive. And this just gets into the dollars and cents, but then you have all of the intrinsic values of actually helping with the burnout rate and with the aspect of compassion fatigue. You're allowing them to be back at the bedside where they want to be. That same camera that we just went over on fall risk and remote nursing, again, when we talk about additional algorithms that can be utilized, this is what we refer to by scaling with a single vendor and having a true platform to impact the problems that you're trying to solve for. That camera can be trained to understand, what does term protocol adherence look like? We know what a patient on their right side and on their left side and their back side looks like. It's not hard to determine that there's a 2-hour time limit around this. So sending automatic notifications, letting the camera do that and send a notification to your nurses or the techs to do the appropriate turn of that patient. And then again, document that all passively into your EMR. We can do things with bed event orchestration. So again, similar to this is when you're connected to the EMR and you're able to see discharge orders come through. At most of your institutions, it's probably your nurse that's managing this workflow right now. They have 5 patients. As one gets discharged, they're the ones that are responsible for calling housekeeping. And then when the bed's clean, they're responsible for contacting bed management to have another patient placed in there. They're managing 4 other patients. This probably falls to the bottom of their list. And so with that, your other departments start to back up. Throughput is a key thing at all organizations. Have the camera do that type of work for you. This is not super sophisticated type of work, but this doesn't require a nursing skill set to do. You have a patient, you see a discharge order come through. From an algorithm standpoint, we know what a dirty bed looks like. We can automatically send notification to housekeeping so they can come in and actually clean the room. And then the system knows what a clean bed looks like. So now that sends an automatic notification to your bed management team to place a new patient. Again, it alleviates the nurse to have to be the middleman and have to remove and have to have them take away from being at the bedside with their other patients to interface with housekeeping or bed management to get them an additional patient. Utilizing that same type of sensor, you can do things with hand washing as well. Again, right now, most institutions leverage nurses that are sitting with a clipboard and doing a secret shopper type of process where they're looking to see, are people actually utilizing the hand sanitizer appropriately? When you have regulatory bodies and agencies like Leapfrog who want to see 200 hand hygiene opportunities each month in each patient care unit, how do you do this without impacting your staffing? How do you do this without taking somebody out of staff to just go ahead and watch something that truly is not value add by seeing this. Have the sensor do that type of work. This is the type of work that AI and machine learning is fantastic at. Doesn't require a nursing skill set to actually watch somebody to see if they have actually utilized the hand sanitizer. The camera can do that. And the camera can then collect that data and send it appropriately to your compliance department. Nurses specifically spend a lot of time searching for stuff. So outside of cameras, you also can have items like Bluetooth tags or ultra-wideband tags that help provide an opportunity to understand where things are in your space. So whether it's running around looking for an IV pump, not only can you see at room level accuracy where an IV pump may be, but if it's in a room that doesn't make sense, like a closet or a storage unit, can automatically and passively send notification to your biomed team so that they can come and take a look at it. Because most likely if it's in a place that it shouldn't be, it's not working. And so instead of relying on a nurse or a charge nurse to go around and try to find spare pumps and then work with clinical engineering or biomed to get them fixed, have the system do that. Those same tags can be utilized to improve the patient experience and how the nurses interact with your patients. Have them be air traffic control in the clinic side. So badges as patients come in help automatically check them into the system. This is great for cancer center patients or dialysis patients who come multiple times. You assign a badge to this patient and leveraging kind of the Bluetooth technology automatically registers them into your EMR. And now nurses or MAs or techs can go up to the patient, chair level accuracy to know who they are and bring them to their next spot. You don't have to call out people by their name. You don't have to be searching for folks. Again, you're making it as easy as possible and putting the work in front of the nurses to help make this as smooth as possible. So as we tie this all back to the adoption of automation, there's a handful of key findings that come out of this. And the first is these senior leaders understand and have started to see that scaling automation is really hard. And part of the reason that it's very difficult is trying to find which process to automate, right? You have to start with that crawl, walk, run mentality and strategy, because if you try to boil the ocean, it becomes too complicated and you don't see the appropriate return on investment that's needed. These senior leaders are talking about moving this away from in-house. They get that the expertise isn't always in-house and their IT teams are already overworked and overwhelmed. And so looking at vendors that this is all that they do, that have a healthcare specific focus, have a proven ROI, but also have the ability to scale. So have an enterprise type of solution. And it's why that this study suggests that the future of AI and automation really lies in having an enterprise-wide type of solution. So something like this, where you are focused on the OR and the procedural side, where you're focused on the inpatient side, as well as the ambulatory areas. Because we know that our nurses, our techs, our doctors, they're working all over the place, and automation needs to help support them so that they can continue to provide the appropriate support that's needed for their patients. So thank you. I know we're ending a couple of minutes early. I wanted to make sure we had enough time for questions. But if there are additional questions even after this, there's 3 emails here that you can reach out to. We'll definitely get you to the right person. I hope you guys have found this informative and enjoyable. But what questions do any of you have for me or for our team here?
Both the Q&A and the chat are open, so if you have any questions for Vikas right now, that would be great. We have a few minutes, like you said, and we do want to thank you for joining us today, Vikas. And following today's session, there is also a short survey to give back your feedback on today's presentation, and you can also have an opportunity there if you would like someone from ARTISIGHT or HPE to reach out to you as well for more information. You can put your contact information there as well. So a copy of the presentation along with the CPHIMS letter for submission will be sent to the registered attendee of today's call. We can wait a few more minutes. There was a comment. Thank you. We truly need to leverage tech to help our clinicians, because Jimmy had stated.
Absolutely. So
So
I see a
do you see
question here
that?
is it real or
Yes.
theoretical? So the examples that we provided here are all real. This is actually stuff that ARTISIGHT has implemented at 40 plus hospitals throughout the country. And we continue to scale with kind of our vendors or our clients on different problems that they want to do. So the fall risk, the telemonitoring, all of those things, and the operating room are things that are in production.
One
Yeah,
other
so
question that came up, because really quickly, is what about legacy system compatibility? And I don't know if they mean on the EHR or more in general, but just want to highlight that one had come in and thought it would be helpful to answer live.
yeah, I think that's a great question. So the ability to integrate with your existing systems is critical. And so I think working with a vendor that has the ability to do that is something that's needed. If you require your nursing or physicians to enter into a whole nother system to do something, you've missed the boat. And this is what I started off with, that technology should not be adding more clicks, should not be adding more of a burden to the users. And so at ARTISIGHT, it's a big thing for us, right? As our CEO mentions, he needs his census and he needs his EMR. So all of the things we do actively integrate within Epic, Cerner, Meditech, whatever your EMR may be. It's absolutely important to do that. If it's a homegrown system, all you need to have is open APIs that can accept and feed data to appropriately send the information to where you need it to go.
One other quick question that came in that we do get frequently is around patients being aware that they are on camera, and how are patients' privacy concerns being addressed with respect to changing clothes or other things?
Yeah, this is a common question, as Robin mentioned. One thing I would highlight is you guys probably already have thousands of cameras in your space. You can't walk anywhere in a healthcare institution without being tracked, right, on security cameras. The cameras that we have in operating rooms on that one I showed you, I would argue are significantly more private than the security camera that was already in that operating room, because we automatically black out kind of everyone that's in that room, because we don't need to know that. We know what the movements are happening and what that reflects from an algorithm standpoint and data point standpoint. So when there are questions around privacy, we absolutely take that into account. At ARTISIGHT, it's a key component for us. The cameras that are in the inpatient room also have a privacy function. So you can basically turn off that camera feed and you can make that clear to your patients. But the other part of it is highlighting to your patients how this is helping them. The ability to have a dialogue with a nurse, having a dialogue with a patient care tech in real time, as opposed to pushing a call button and waiting for somebody to come and respond to them. And being able to see the person is also really impactful. And so I think being able to coach the team appropriately on how you position this technology in front of patients is important. And when patients see that, generally there's not much of an issue. I see another question here about can you describe a sequence of projects that represent a good on-ramp for implementing this approach? And what I would say to that, depending on the problem you're trying to solve, yes, we have the right first problem depending on the area that you're focused on. So whether if it's the OR procedural areas, it's working on coordination. So it's improving kind of what throughput looks like. And so that's simple data points around when a patient enters the place or when a patient is leaving, and sending the appropriate communication to housekeeping to turn a room around. Those are things that add value immediately, and people start to trust the system and see what the benefit of it is. On the inpatient side, it's the digital window. Allow nurses or techs to be able to watch patients from a digital screen, so that you're not pulling 10 techs to sit with 10 patients, but instead only having to pull one tech to watch 10 of your patients. And on the ambulatory side, it's really the clinic. How do you try to take what you're doing like in the ORs, but do it in the clinic side and really improve kind of the overall communication and throughput that happens to impact kind of the nursing side?
Well, I don't see any more questions in the chat or in the Q&A at this time. So thank you again, Vikas, for joining us today for the excellent presentation. And just to remind everyone, if you would like to review it again, it will be posted on our YouTube New England HIMSS channel for a second look if you'd like. So I just thank you again for joining us today. And please take a moment to complete the exit survey to give us your feedback. Thanks, everyone, and have a good day.
Great. Thank you.